Medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and does not serve as medical advice. Kate and John are not medical professionals. This podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any illness. Always consult your physician before making lifestyle changes.
Welcome back to the Illuminated Path podcast. We're happy to bring you episode 3 today.
This podcast is brought to you by New Moon Holistic Life, which is our holistic life coaching practice, and sponsored by New Moon Apparel. New Moon Apparel makes Zen, motivational, and moon-themed clothing. It's the easiest way to support us, our podcast, and our channel. And if you do get value from this podcast, please remember to like, follow, share, subscribe. It really helps us get the word out.
And leave a review.
So how's the week?
The week is going good. The day that we are recording this is a couple days before the New York Giants have their first game against the Cowboys, and I'm really nervous and really hoping they win. So we'll see by next episode if that happened. It was really hot this week. It was like 90 degrees, and it's probably the last week that it's going to get that hot. And I mean, I loved it.
Yeah, I'm not ready for cold weather.
Me neither. I posted a poll in our story and asked if people were ready for fall or hoping for summer to stay. A lot of people said fall. My question to you guys is, what happens in early November when we have to change the clock and it's dark out at like 4 o'clock?
Fall is like 10 days.
Yeah.
Like October is beautiful.
October is fall.
Love Halloween, but then it's over pretty quick.
But fall is actually technically until right before Christmas. All of that's fall, guys. So
nah, it's mostly winter.
Don't forget about that, guys. How about you?
Good. Yeah, I did better with fasting this week. I had some better workouts. I've been writing a lot, so I'm reading a book called The Artist's Way, and it's really about kind of like creative recovery, right? Like when you grow up, you get into adulthood and your creative side is kind of diminished by the world we live in. And so this book is really like a course it's a 12-week course on just recovering that component of yourself and your divinity. So it's really interesting. I've been doing a lot of writing, and
nice.
I got a little voice recorder, so now I just carry that around everywhere, and it's been really, really good, really interesting.
Very good.
So we want to talk about boundaries today. I think we got some good questions about this, and we kind of got into the conversation with awareness of, you're becoming aware of these things. What are the next steps? What sort of things do you do? And I don't know that like every episode's going to be this chronological order, but I think right now at the start, we can really kind of talk about these tools.
Yeah. And I mean, we did start to talk about boundaries a little bit in the last episode, and boundaries definitely really ties in with your nervous system and that fight or flight response. And if you're able to hold your boundaries, or if you're letting, people cross those boundaries, and then that triggers you and sends you into that because it's crossing a line and it's not what you want and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when you're starting to become more aware and we're talking about this fight or flight response and finding yourself in chronic stress, boundaries is a big part of that conversation, because you start to realize there's situations you're in that don't serve you. They make you feel worse, or they're triggering that fight or flight response. But I think also that kind of gets into like people pleasing, right? Which we'll get into in a little bit. So as far as boundaries, I mean, I wrote a little note about this because I was thinking like, I think the big one is in the workplace, right? Like we need to have a larger discussion about boundaries in the workplace. And I mean that in like the sense of like a lot of different areas, right? Like alcohol culture. You and I have both been in organizations where it was common to just drink, have a beer, go out any day of the week with coworkers.
Lots of happy hours.
Yep. But I think to that point too, even in friend groups, right? Like there was a there's like a level of like, oh, you're not at that threshold yet where we're gonna stop you from driving. Like there's an alcohol culture of driving buzzed,
Mm,
which is dangerous, number one, right? But it's just kind of like something that isn't being acknowledged.
yeah.
I think, wine. I'm gonna wind down. Like people talk about like I like a glass of wine at night to relax. Okay, but are you doing that every night? And so I'm trying to like I've come a long way in terms of alcohol. I mean, you and I don't drink anymore. We're what? It's a year now.
A year and 3 months?
Yeah. So we're a year and 3 months sober.
Yeah.
Um, how are you feeling?
I feel great about it.
Yeah.
It was difficult at first, but there was definitely boundaries that we had to set with that because I can remember at the beginning when we had stopped, there were things that we had going on, like events that we went to, and it was uncomfortable at first. And we had to like really hold strong, like when we were offered a drink, like, no,
Yeah.
that's, that's not what I choose anymore. And that was a boundary that we had to stick to. And it did change things for us. I mean, we stopped going to a lot of those events because, yeah, there was a component of it that was a little bit uncomfortable. Um, but we
Yeah.
also just realized like that's not our scene.
I mean, we were doing a lot of networking,
Yeah.
and I think we reached a point of realizing like a lot of the events we were going to weren't expanding our business. We weren't making new connections. We weren't getting leads. It wasn't necessarily bringing us business so much as it was a community of people to sure talk and maybe hang out with. But a lot of times there's alcohol involved. And
Mhm.
what I don't appreciate is when the event is conditional and revolves around the alcohol.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it was a long journey. We definitely had to set some boundaries there, um, and really kind of distance ourselves from that and ask ourselves, is this really going to serve us to go? Um, but to kind of tie that back in with the workplace, I think the big place where it's tough to set boundaries is with your employer and having family time. Um, and I guess I'll just say it point blank. Like if you're putting in overtime, but there is not reciprocity in that relationship with your employer,
Yeah.
that's not a good relationship. And to your point, I mean, speak to the fear in that.
The fear of like if you don't put in that overtime, what's going to happen? Are you going to lose that chance at the promotion or
I mean, I think like there's, am I going to be compensated? Are you going to get more perks? Like what? Because so often it's, hey, I need you to finish this report or whatever it is. I need you to stay late, but you got to pick your kids up from soccer or,
Mhm.
whatever it is. Or you're not going to have that time to go to the gym now and take care of your body. Like,
Or if you are putting in the overtime, you're staying late one day, are you allowed to go home early the next day?
right. And I mean, I would point blank, like if I stay an extra hour today, I'm leaving an hour early tomorrow.
Right. I mean, and what did you what was the written agreements that you made when you accepted this job? And then like those are the boundaries that you are absolutely allowed to hold.
Yeah.
And if you are scared to hold those boundaries and have a conversation with whoever is crossing those boundaries, then maybe this is not the place for you to stay. And I mean, this is just in terms of work, but this is in terms of all things in life that have to do with boundaries. Like, if it doesn't feel good, if you know that your boundaries are continually being crossed, then that's on you to do something about it. Because if you're going to continuously try to hold your boundary and nothing is happening to respect that, then that now it's your chance to overcome the fear and do something else.
Yeah.
Find a new job,
Well, I think
find new friend groups. Like,
that's just it, is I think it's tough to set those boundaries because people feel like if they don't go above and beyond, they're, I guess, more disposable as an employee.
Yeah.
But in reality, you know, if you look at research on this, right, they found that if you, and I don't have numbers, I wasn't planning on going down this rabbit hole, but if you like plan to stay at a job, you typically will get paid less. Whereas someone who changes jobs every 2 years, right,
Oh, yeah.
they make on average at least a minimum of 20% more. But
Yep.
after 5 years, 10 years, you've doubled what you would have been making at one place.
Mhm.
And I think there's more to this, right? Is like we as a society have almost glorified this like loyalty to your employer,
Yeah.
but the employer doesn't reciprocate that anymore. We
No.
don't have pensions anymore. We don't have so many organizations that are really taking care of their employees. So, like, what you owe them is what is in the contract,
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's it. And if you're fulfilling that, you don't have a higher responsibility
Mhm.
to give more.
You have a responsibility to yourself and to your family to hold your boundaries, and again, like I said, if they're not respecting those boundaries, let go of that fear and look elsewhere.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no reason that you can't find another job that provides you with everything that you need to make a living. It's just we have it stuck in our minds because like to just stay where we are because it's comfortable and it's not scary.
Yeah.
And same thing with staying friends with people who are not respecting your boundaries. I mean, people have issues with boundaries in their families and have to really set those boundaries and sometimes take a very big step back from what they're able to offer, what the type of time that they're spending with them,
Yeah.
even like the types of conversations and what you're willing to share. Because if people just cross boundaries and try to poke and prod into your life and you don't want to share those things, you don't have to,
Right.
but you are going to potentially be made to feel guilty.
Yeah. And I think that, something that really goes in line with this conversation is that when you're setting boundaries, and we've had this conversation with our chiropractor, shout
Mm.
out Dr. Brad, um, you know, you're always setting boundaries, especially as an entrepreneur, right? You're constantly dealing with your clients and figuring out what you are and aren't willing to accept in your life. But that holds true in your relationships, in your work life, in so many aspects of life. Because just because you set the boundary once, that unfortunately doesn't mean that it's always going to be respected and honored. You're gonna have to keep reminding people of that boundary.
Yeah. And I think it's important to really think about how you're setting your boundary and putting it in like using the word I, talking
Mm,
about yourself. Don't point fingers or say something in a way that is going to cause offense to someone else. Like it's truly about you, yourself, your values and your goals and what you are willing to do or not do.
yeah. You helped me with this a lot. There were situations I was in where I I would set the boundary, but I was addressing them. You're doing this, you're doing that. And instead I had to change the narrative
Yeah.
of I feel this. And I think that really helped the situation. It really set the boundary in a very different way that didn't put the person on offense.
Yeah.
Because in reality, when you are doing it in that way and calling someone out, that tends to be very pointed
Yeah.
and they tend to get aggressive or defensive or, whatever it is.
Yeah. And that's not really making the point that you need to make either.
Right.
Um, I know we talked a lot about, workplace boundaries and such. And I mentioned like family and friends. And I think a big part of that, something that I had to overcome a few times was like getting over like FOMO,
Yeah.
your fear of missing out and saying no to things when you have other plans for yourself. You have other promises that you've made to yourself. And especially, when it comes to managing your time and giving yourself time to do things that are for your better good and then crossing that boundary and just going along with what someone else wants you to do. I mean, there were many times I was asked to go out and do X, Y, and Z or whatever. And I had plans to go to the gym. Like, that is the only time I had to go to the gym. So I'm either giving up something that I promised myself, or I'm going to keep that promise and say, "No, I'm sorry. Like, this is more important to me." And those people who respect you and respect your boundaries, they're not going to question it at all. Period. They're
Mm,
going to be like, "Absolutely no worries at all. Like, we'll plan something for another day."
yeah. And this is, I mean, kind of a sidebar, but I think it goes along with boundaries is like when you log on to social media, you're being inundated with, tons of things, random,
Mhm.
and they're little snippets, right? So an important point to say in setting boundaries and becoming intentional, you should also curate your feed so
Yeah.
that when you log into social media, the things you're seeing and being influenced by are things that are beneficial to you and your goals. And I mean that in the sense of like those people from high school that you don't talk to, that you guys just have this weird, like, keep an eye on what they're doing, or like this egotistical, like, am I doing better than them? Like,
Mhm.
unfollow them, get over it, you
Yeah.
know? And, personally, when I had to really rebuild my life, I studied the ultra wealthy and the ultra healthy. And what are those two groups doing? And so to tie this all back in, Alex Hermosi talks about local benefit versus global benefit.
Mm.
So to apply that to a situation with boundaries, right? Local benefit, you're going to go out drinking with your friends, you'll have a good time. You have more fun in the more immediate term. But the global benefit would be prioritizing your health.
The long term.
It's the larger picture, what
Yeah.
serves you as a whole, or in a group context, what serves the community.
Yeah.
So global benefit being, really prioritizing your goals. And that's much larger discussion about motivation and discipline. But curating your feed, yeah, I think, is a really powerful tool so that you're not logging in and seeing random nonsense, but also you're not seeing things that are making you feel bad.
Yeah. I think that's, we talked a lot about setting boundaries with other people, and that's setting boundaries within yourself.
Yeah.
Like, we have to set boundaries within ourselves, and some of that's going to be to help you overcome habits that you don't want to have. Um and really being able to create and spend your time in a way that is productive and feels good
Yeah.
for yourself.
So, in this conversation of boundaries and fear of missing out, um, talk to me about the connection with people pleasing.
Mm. People pleasing is something that I have definitely struggled with. I think a lot of people do. There's a big fear of, what is someone else going to think of me if I take this action or say this or make this decision? And they're going to be mad at me, or they're going to be upset with me, or it's going to start an argument, it's going to create an issue. And so we have this big fear of, what if?
Yeah.
What if this is how they react? And so you, instead of staying true to yourself, you just go along with it, because the fear of the discomfort that can come from potential conflict is so much greater, that you're willing to let go of your boundary. You're willing to do what needs to be done in order to make that other person feel good, or be happy, like, make them feel happy, make them feel valued, or whatever it is, that you just go against yourself because you're just so concerned with how you're going to look.
Yeah. And I think some conversations that stem off of that, right, is assumptions versus expectations, right? You make an assumption about how someone will react. You
Yeah.
make an assumption that there will be conflict.
Yeah.
Um, and also being selfish, right? Like, it's not being selfish, it's prioritizing yourself. You cannot show up for other people before you show up for yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's the saying. You can't pour from an empty cup. So I think there's a lot of situations where people have this fear of being perceived as selfish when in reality there's a difference when you're prioritizing yourself and your health and what needs to happen for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, I've struggled with this. I still do. I don't like conflict, and I will make assumptions that there could be potentially conflict, and so I've put people before myself. You know, it's whether it's friends, whether it's with work or with you even, like I care so much about how that other person is going to respond and feel towards me that I would rather do what I have to do to get a positive reaction and know that they feel good about me than put myself first, even if it can potentially create tension.
Yeah. But in the long term, and it's like stress. It's not sustainable.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No, because then you are continually showing yourself and showing like your subconscious that you don't put yourself first.
Right.
And that just has a whole realm of other consequences. And you potentially are breaking promises to yourself. You are breaking, habits that you're trying to keep. Um, yeah, I mean,
So let me ask you this. Do you think that it kind of has to do with like people caring too much about their perception? Because,
absolutely.
well, what I'm thinking is like it at the root of this is only caring what you think about yourself. And I think that's the discussion of like life is not a competition with other people. It's a competition of who you used to be.
Right.
And I think that it's misconstrued. And so you're too focused on how you're perceived.
Your outward appearance
Yeah.
versus, yeah, how you feel about yourself.
Right.
Are you truly happy with who you are, how you act, your day to day habits and actions? And if you are, then again, it goes back to like those that love you and respect you and care for you. They're not going to say anything negative about that because you have to have confidence in who you are and that you're happy with who you are. And that will, show to others. But it's easier said than done. But you have to start to teach yourself to not care what else someone thinks about you.
Yeah. I think, one of the things too is like if you are someone who prioritizes yourself, you're comfortable in what you believe about yourself and what your image of yourself is and who you are. You're unapologetically you.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember situations we were in our businesses, in contracts where we set a pretty hard boundary, and it wasn't always respected. And I
Mm-mm.
think in a lot of we had situations where somebody's like, "Well, I'm giving you a very high profile account," and I remember thinking like, I don't care about that. What I care about is the work I'm doing and whether or not I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, and whether or not it's going to be a good relationship.
Right.
And like early on, we already saw that like that was like our boundaries were not going to be respected.
Yeah. Yeah. We got kind of a glimpse of what it was all going to look like, and decided that wasn't for us.
Yeah. And I mean, there have been times where we've had to have uncomfortable conversations with clients, and I get very anxious
Yeah.
before having those conversations. And I know that that's that people pleasingness coming out of me. And
Hmm.
you really help me because you're a lot better at not caring about what they're going to think and just
I
saying
don't.
it respectfully and what needs to be said. But
I try to be very like respectful.
yeah,
Um, I think when it comes to corporate, I I always see it as this like political game that I know how to play, but it's also like it's tough. because I don't like that's not real life. It's not how you talk to people. Like so yeah, I try to be politically correct in those situations. I don't really feel like I can be great with my words, but in those situations I struggle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we have a good dynamic that allows us to handle that. I think that's been really nice in our consulting is, being able to do that together.
Yeah.
Um, anything else on boundaries?
Just that I think a lot of people and myself included, like just going back to the conflict piece, we just assume that like there's going to be conflict or an argument or a fight. And it really is in the way that you say it. And you can't control the reaction of someone else.
Yeah.
All you can control is yourself and the way that you go about it. And you're going to get maybe no reaction and understanding, and that's great. But if you do get a reaction from someone, from your boss, your friends, your family, whoever you're setting a boundary with, you have to really remember to try to stay present and stay level-headed and not get into that argument or conflict back with them. Like
Yeah.
stand your ground.
But especially, I'm thinking like generally a reasonable person is receiving the boundary and seeking to understand.
Mhm.
But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of situations where we're dealing with toxic people who maybe are more narcissistic or they get aggressive and confrontational. And in those situations, you know, it, yeah, absolutely, you have to understand like you can't engage that.
Right. And you don't have to explain yourself.
Mm,
Like, you don't owe anyone an explanation as to why this is important to you. If you want to share, like, this is my value and this is why it's important. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying to, say, your employer, like, I cannot work past the 40 hours that is in the job description and the contract that I signed up for in this job because my family is extremely important to me and I have limited time with them. I
yeah,
cannot give any more time because I am losing time with one of the most important things in my life.
right.
You're sharing your value and again like that's you don't have to, but if you want to, there's like that can just really help you to get your point across and hope that they're going to receive the message and be understanding.
Yeah. I mean, I just think like, it sounds kind of funny, but if your boss was ever like, hey, can you stay late? You're allowed to say no and
Yeah.
not explain further and just
Right.
say no.
You're allowed to say no to anything
Right. And
without
that's
explanation. No is a full sentence.
absolutely no is a full sentence. And you don't owe an explanation after that. But I think too, no is I hear this a lot in like higher consciousness and like the holistic community is just no is, yes, a full sentence, but also something that you need to get used to saying. It's something that as you set boundaries, you'll say it a lot more. And it's important to be comfortable giving your no and unapologetically saying, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And sorry, one more thing I thought about
No.
with like the people pleasing and saying no is you don't have to say sorry.
Mm,
That's something
my
I
love.
I still do it. I try. It just I don't know where that came from, but somewhere along the line I just felt like I needed to apologize for everything. And I say sorry for so many things that do not require an apology in any way, shape, or form. And so I have to be extremely conscious to tell myself, like, I'm not going to apologize for this. I'm not going to apologize for this. This is my decision. This is my thought, or whatever it is. And not say, I'm sorry for it. Like, you don't
Right.
have to be sorry. You're not doing anything wrong by choosing yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a good, do, are you good on that kind of, okay. So I think this is a really good segue into the questions. So A really great question we got was, how do you separate from toxic people without feeling like a terrible person?
Yeah, that's tough. You still, I mean, those feelings of being a terrible person, they might be there.
Yeah.
And like regardless of the way you go about it, but
But again, sorry to cut you off, but again, just because those feelings are there, or really those are coming from your thoughts and they're not necessarily true.
right.
So, yes, the situation might be uncomfortable. You might have uncomfortable feelings, but understand that there's a lot of factors at play. There's how that person's going to react and how they're going to handle it. And there's also the thoughts that you had about the situation that led to those feelings.
Yeah, like why are you ultimately making this decision? And if you feel like 100% like this is what I need for myself, my well-being, and for my future, then separating from those toxic people, that is a necessity for you and that is a boundary you have to set, and it's almost a guarantee they're not going to be happy with it.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
unfortunate.
especially if they're confrontational or they're, truly a toxic person that I'm going to give you guys a term that's going to change your life. An energy vampire.
Love that one.
Energy vampires, they suck the life out of you.
Yeah.
They drain you emotionally. You just every time you're around them, you feel worse. Those types of people are not the people you can design and build a life with.
Yeah.
They they generally are going to affect your life. If you're, working on a goal, these are the people that are, "Oh, are you sure you can do that? Does that make sense?" Like there will always be some negative, pessimistic response. And I think the point is these are people who generally are toxic, but they're in their own way and they have deep work to do that they're not doing.
Right. At the end of the day, they have things that they need to deal with on their own, and you can't necessarily continue to be in their life if it's affecting you negatively.
You know?
And so, back to like how we were talking about setting boundaries and making sure you're saying it in terms of I am making this decision, and like that is the decision. You can explain, you don't have to explain, and it's likely going to bring up negative feelings and uncomfortable feelings. But if you really know that you're making the right choice, then you will get over those feelings. It's okay to sit with them, like breaking up with a friend or, stopping having a relationship with someone. It's going to create negative feelings. You're going to feel bad, but you can work through those feelings. And I can tell you that, with time, it'll be okay and you'll
Yeah.
feel okay about it. And there will be points where you will recognize, yeah, I definitely made the right decision.
Yeah. I think to that point, the longer you go without that person in your life, you generally start to make more and more sense of it and get more and more clarity on the situation. Um, I can tell you, Kate and I in the past few years have had some energy vampires that we've walked away from.
Yeah.
And you really start to realize the longer you are without that person, without that presence in your life, the more you realize how they impacted you and really how negative everything was. The other thing I will say, energy vampires are terrible at closure.
Mm,
And I say this as someone who used to be one and was very toxic. You are generally going to deal with situations where there's always some reason they have to come back. There's always some reason they want closure 52 times. Um, and it's tough and it can feel cold, but you ultimately, this goes back to the conversation, you can't pour from an empty cup. Like if someone is affecting your well-being, and I think here's where we get lost is they may not be physically harming you, but they can be mentally harming you, emotionally harming you. that is still abuse, and that
Yeah.
still needs to be removed from your life.
Yeah.
And that's a tough situation to be in. It's tough, but like I said, the longer you go away from it, the more clarity you do get on it.
Yeah. I mean, I know that speaking for myself, as I've grown up and I have really changed and lost people that I was friends with and I was spending my weekends with, and we grew apart. Not necessarily that they were toxic, but it's you start to really see like who your people are, and that circle. I mean, to me, it's quality over quantity. And
Yeah.
so that your circle grows smaller and you drift apart from some people, and that's okay. You have to be okay with that and know that you're making the right decisions for yourself and for your future.
Yeah. I would rather have a smaller circle of people who clap for me rather than a big circle of people who are mostly acquaintances, and you never really know where they stand, if they actually care or what it looks like.
Yeah.
I think you grow apart from people, and that's natural. And part of that goes back to awareness is, as you become aware, there's people in your life that it may be neutral. They're not necessarily negative or toxic, but they maybe don't support your goals, where you're heading in life. And that's a conversation of alignment too. Are you seeing life in similar ways?
Mhm.
I think so much of holistic living is about personal power. And, we'll get into that as manifesting and designing your life, visualizing. Um, but it all ties together.
Yeah. And just because you separate from someone, I mean, depending on the level of what you're saying is toxic or just not a good fit anymore, like
Yeah.
you can always still cheer them on from afar.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. You can love someone from afar. You can miss someone from afar, but not want them in your life.
Absolutely. That's a big conversation. I don't know if you remember, we talked to uh, a life transition coach, and she actually kind of hinted at that she had a situation where there was someone in her life who didn't support her opening her practice, and she had to deal with a very difficult transition of understanding, I love this person, they are in my family, they're my relative, and I can be civil with them, but they don't support me. And that's not an energy that I'm allowing into my life.
Yeah.
It's tough. I think setting boundaries is always different. Like sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's family. And there's different nuances to each area that you have to set boundaries in. But it's worth it.
Yeah.
Next question.
Yes. So this one goes a little bit more along with episode 2, but very relevant. So listen to episode 2 if you haven't. But the question was, they're looking for advice on how to stop or get out of the fight or flight and adrenaline feeling when something triggers it.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to dive way more into just chronic stress and the nervous system and explain all of that. We've done like presentations on that. And so this question, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
There's no one thing that's going to work for you, but it's really about having different resources and knowing and understanding what works for you, and also knowing and understanding it's not always going to be the same. Because when you do feel like you're triggered and you're in that fight or flight, it sometimes you feel one way, and you need to realize like what you need in that moment to feel better and to bring you back into just feeling okay. And other times it might be just a totally different feeling. You need something different. Um, so to share a few ideas of things that you can do and kind of have as tools and resources for you and practice these. intentionally practice them. Like, I've heard of some people having like a list by their desk when they know that that's a place that they might have that happen a lot with work or whatnot. Um, Step away from the situation if you can. If you are able to, you might not be able to depending on where you are and what it is, but give yourself a moment to breathe and come back to being present.
Yeah, and we can get into, breathing exercises that'll help reset the nervous system. There's a lot of breath work that really ties in with the nervous system and re-regulating the body. Um, Sorry to jump in, but I think in that same line of thinking is cold water exposure.
Mm,
So if you're watching this, you probably have seen ice baths are all the rage. Um, there's a lot of reasons for this. They do a lot to heal the body. They do a lot to help you lose weight and run more efficiently. Um, but in kind of the ultra wealthy space, they like it because when they're stressed, they will get in the ice bath and it resets them. And this cold exposure helps reset your central nervous system. And maybe you don't have an ice bath, that's okay. The research on this basically says the primary benefit, if you want to get the most benefit you can without having an ice bath, you can simply just go splash some cold water on your face. Really get your face wet, cold water as cold as possible, and take a second.
Kind of shocks you and forces you to become present.
Yeah. So there are cold shock proteins. Um, I can't really speak to all that right now because I don't have that in depth of an understanding of what those do. But this really helps reset your nervous system. It gets you um, very aware, very present to where you need to be.
Yeah, and we can absolutely speak to that working. We've
Yep.
had ice baths. We're looking to get a new one because the ones we had unfortunately didn't work out for the long term. But oh my gosh, I mean, the feeling that you have afterwards is like, I can't explain it.
Endorphin release. You can do it at night and it'll activate melatonin production. There are so many ways to use ice baths as a very medicinal practice.
Yeah.
Um, in that same discussion, to kind of loop back, getting out of fight or flight, once you're in it, again, it's a practice. Like you're going to have to try things. You're going to have to figure out what works for you. You're really going to have to go through the laundry list of trying things and seeing what does and doesn't work for you. Cause like Kate said, it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Um, and my last thought on that is just, that's really why the CT FAR exercise, circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result, that's really beneficial because it helps you before you get to those feelings.
Yeah. Some others to share is just going outside, getting in fresh air and sunshine, going for a walk or a run. I
We
mean, walking, like, you're literally getting out some of that energy.
Yep, walking has really profound health benefits. There's compounds in the air called phytoncides that we actually did a little snippet on. These literally do everything. They lower your blood pressure. They fight cancer. They're what's known as natural killer cells. So they're really just getting outside, getting fresh air. Even in the book I'm reading about your creative recovery, she talks about that. Uh, if you go back to like 1800s, gardens were very prominent because it was very common for innovators and thinkers to go and walk because
Mhm.
now we're finding a lot more research on it helps your creative flow. It helps you reset, it helps you reconnect. And a simple walk really could change your life.
Yeah. Walk outside barefoot.
Grounding on the earth, yep.
Mhm.
Absorb the earth's magnetic field. There's a lot of healing benefits on that we can get into,
Yeah. Um, a few more, just talk to someone about it.
but not venting.
Yeah, be careful with venting and just, like, being angry or mad, but, like, talk to someone
So
and look for empathy, not sympathy.
yes. And I think an important point to mention there is, when you're venting, that goes back to thoughts creating your feelings. Your brain doesn't know the difference between the actual experience and what you're thinking. So when you're thinking about the same situation, you are physically putting your body back through that experience. So be
Mhm.
very careful about venting. And this is kind of that discussion of playing the victim. Complaining is actually keeping you in fight or flight.
Right. Um, and even just hugging someone, hugging your dog, your cat, and co-regulating with them.
That's an oxytocin release. That's your love hormone. That can be a great way to co regulate and get yourself reset. It can be a baby, it can be a pet. Pets, I believe, pets and babies are the two that uh, it's like the quickest, as I understand it.
Hmm.
So they really, you can hug your kid, hug your dog, your cat, and get a much better release. And the other thing that's interesting there, I actually just saw something on this, is the frequency that they resonate at is much higher. And
Mhm.
so we'll talk about this further, but when you're experiencing these emotions of anger or resentment or whatever it is, that you're in fight or flight. And so those emotions are a much lower frequency. And so if you can hug someone that's in a different state or maybe a more positive state, they're generally at a higher frequency. And being at a higher frequency is, that frequency of love and really getting back to a regulated state.
Yeah. I think the last couple that I had was go for a drive, put on some music, put the windows down, and journaling. I mean, do stream of consciousness writing where you just get a piece of paper and you just write and don't stop. Don't worry about like punctuation and neatness or whatever. Like just get it out so it's getting out of your head and then like really take a deep breath after and be able to let it go.
Yeah.
I mean, I have done things where I've done the stream of consciousness and I've crinkled it up and lit it on fire after. And like it's like a symbolic way of like, okay, I'm letting this go.
Yeah. You know, um, Going for a drive, singing, humming,
Mm,
I believe that's vagal tone, right?
yep.
So when you're doing this, when you're, say singing or humming even, um, and really just enjoying it, it's vibrating your vocal cords and it's impacting your vagus nerve, which will actually, we'll do a whole deep dive on the vagus nerve. And Kate can speak to this much better than me, but it'll help your body reset and get back into the rest and digest state.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in for episode 3. Feel free to leave us a review, share, like our and submit questions. We're going to put some questions up again on our social media pages so we can answer your question just like we did these in a future episode.
Yep. And you can always write in at the illuminatedpathpodcast.com. I think we'll probably get through a couple more episodes, but we can do live coaching coming up. So if you're interested in applying for live coaching, feel free to go right in on our website.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in.